Channel 11 presents Talk It Over. Here's your host, Ellen Adelstein.
Hello, and welcome to Talk It Over. It's good to be back in Tucson, Arizona, doing this show live from our studios for a change instead of trouncing around the Middle East. My guest today is Mary Chrisp, and she's a very well-known national celebrity, hails from Arizona. She is co-chair of the Republican National Party. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you, Ellen. It's nice to be here.
I bet it is.
Yes, indeed.
I admire you people that go to serve our country, but yet you have to spend most of your time in Washington, D.C.
Not really. In my job, in fact, in the last 17 months in the position as co-chairman, I have traveled over 150,000 miles, and I find that you learn a great deal about the country, and for me right now, it's so nice to be home in Arizona. So I'm spending a week here doing what I do around the nation to help my party and also to campaign for Republican candidates.
What do you do? As co-chair of the Republican Party, what are your duties?
Well, I do a number of things. My office is responsible for all the auxiliaries, the outreach, the Hispanics, the black auxiliary, the women, the young Republicans and the college Republicans, the overseas Republicans. Beyond that, I sort of see myself as an ambassador for the party, a spokesman. As I said, I do travel. I speak at Republican events and at nonpartisan events. Like today in Tucson, I spoke to the Rotary, which I felt was a great privilege, and as a woman, I felt it was an honor, and knowing how they feel about women and politics, and so it was very nonpartisan. Plus, I try to speak to women leaders, influential community leaders in the country in informal sessions like we're doing here to get their sense of politics and what their concerns are, what kinds of things we share together. So it's basically the job and its objective is to help Republicans win elections so that we as a party can once again govern at all levels.
How did you become the co-chair? What process leads up to your election?
Well, I've lived in Arizona for over 20 years, and
Phoenix, we should say.
Yeah, in Scottsdale is really my home, and I still have a home there. And about 17 years ago, I read a book called The Capitalist Manifesto by Dr. Mortimer Adler, in which he said the most important and the best way to influence and affect your own life and the life of the community was involvement in politics and government. And this had a great appeal to me, so I went to the party headquarters and volunteered. So from that time until now, I've experienced probably every job in the political organization and in the political process, from being a poll watcher to a precinct committeeman, a vice chairwoman, a state vice chairwoman, and then I was elected national committee woman for my party in 1972. Then from that point, as I say, you keep doing the job at hand. And
doing a good job.
Thank you very much. And I love the people and I love the interaction. And then by 1976, I was chosen to be the secretary of the arrangements committee for the 1976 convention, never realizing that I possibly would be called upon to be the secretary of the national convention at which I was to call the roll. This did happen in 1976, and
you mean you were the lady up there going, Alabama?
Right, I was the Mississippi, yes. And the claim is that I was the only secretary who ever pronounced the name of the states properly, and I was teased about this, but I had been out in Kansas City a week before the convention because I was on the arrangements committee, and so I talked to all the members from the various states, and they'd say to me, all right, Mary, how are you going to say Mississippi? And they'd say Mississippi or whatever. So we went through all that, but I had a lot of fun doing it. And then immediately after the convention was over, the next day, the National Committee organized and re-elected its new officers. And I was very honored and very pleased to be elected the secretary of the National Committee. And that was like in August of '76. By January of 1977, I received the great honor of being elected by the National Committee as co-chairman, and then was re-elected in 78 this past January.
Okay. All right. Let's stop for a moment, and we'll be right back with Mary Chrisp. Mary, are you the first woman who has ever had this very high position in the Republican Party?
No, I'm not, actually. There have been two. Ann Armstrong was a co-chairman. And in our rules, if the chairman is a man, then the co-chairman is a woman. So when Mary Louise Smith resigned last year, then when we had the reelection, so the co-chairman was then a man, so it was just reversed. So no, I am not. But in the Democratic Party, it's called a vice chairman, the woman who holds a comparable job, and she's still really head of the women's division. In the Republican National Committee, we have done away with any such thing as a women's division. Chairman Bill Brock and I do indeed share the responsibility of leadership, even though we have designated areas of responsibility. So in that sense, I like to say that our party has really moved ahead in terms of sharing and mutually sharing.
Are you the person that comes out, let's say that President Carter makes a big speech, are you the person that comes out and answers for the Republican Party and says, hey, Jimmy Carter, you're wrong on this, and that?
Well, Chairman Brock is the spokesman for the party in one sense, but yes, I certainly do have that opportunity and certainly take advantage of that opportunity to, in an objective way for the good of the country, make any criticism as a member of the loyal opposition, just like any Republican elected office holder would do.
I see. Are you paid in this position?
Yes, it's a paid position and it's full-time. I live in Washington. My office for the Republican headquarters is on Capitol Hill. And the nation's capital is a very exciting, thrilling city to be in. But again, I think for myself, I maintain a much broader and deeper perspective of what's happening in the country by going out into the 50 states where elections are won. They're not won in Washington. And you could become very insular if you just stayed in the nation's capital for any length of time, because you can't have a sense of, say, what Arizonans are thinking or what Pennsylvanians are thinking.
Well, that's a very important point that you bring up about traveling to the 50 states. And of course, many people criticized President Nixon on that very point, that he had only turned inward and that he didn't know what the rest of the country was thinking. If we had a Republican president now, how much access would you and Mr. Brock have to report what you were finding out as you traveled the land?
Well, I think we'd have a great deal of access because, as I saw when President Ford was in the White House, there was a great deal of free exchange, a fluid movement there between the political party leadership with the executive, President Ford. I think, again, it's an individual matter. It depends. It's just like President Carter. He's been accused of not being accessible. So I do believe it's the individual who holds that office, and also it's determined by the people that surround that individual.
It's a matter of personality.
I think so. I think it is. But I do think it's the man or the woman who holds the position that determines the policy. If you're going to really be open, if you really want to be accessible, and if you really listen and want to care, why, then it's up to you. The buck stops, as old Harry Truman used to say, with yourself.
Two questions about your job. Number one, I think people would be interested to know what you are paid by the Republican Party, I might add for you, not by the United States government, but by the party. And secondly, would you become chair if Mr. Brock, for some reason, had to resign? Would you become chair because you are co-chair, or would there be a new election?
Your first question as to what my salary is, it's $38,500. The second part of the question is what would happen if Chairman Bill Brock resigned. I do indeed believe that I would carry forth his responsibilities until an election was held. But I'm just not certain about the rules on that, but that would be my thought off the top of my head.
I see.
Yes.
While we're talking about elections, I know that there was sort of a tempest, you might say, or more than a tempest, over your reelection recently. And I wonder if you could fill us in a little bit on that.
Well, I think I know I'm the only co-chairman of the Republican Party that has ever been challenged. And by virtue of that challenge in January of this year, I think for the first time we had a co-chairman that was actually elected. Usually, and this occurs in the Democratic Party as well, usually the vice chairman of the Democratic Party or the co-chairman of the Republican Party has really been appointed or designated by the chairman. Mm-hmm. In this instance, it was a great opportunity for the women within our party to get the support of the men and women on the National Committee and say, we re-elect Mary Chrisp, the co-chairman. So in that sense, the challenge was great. The challenge was instigated and carried forth by the right wing of our party, by Lynn Nossinger, who is executive director for the committee of the Republic. No, it's not right. Citizens of the Republic. And it was a movement to remove me, who they felt that I was controversial. But the overwhelming victory I had...
You don't look controversial to me.
Well, it's a point of view, but indeed the National Committee members supported me wholeheartedly, and I won handily, and the woman who was put up as my opposition was not a member of the committee, and it, really was not in a position to have won. You don't remove someone who's doing a good job with someone who's not an outsider.
Well, as I recall, the man who led this fight against you seemed to have picked up a, at least as reported in the press, a black woman to challenge you, trying to bring in a racial tone to this election rather than who had the best credentials in the Republican Party.
You're absolutely right. And this, again, was a very sophisticated strategy to appeal to the Republican National Committee and Republican Party leaders that, yes, it would be great to have a co-chairman of the Republican Party who was black, which is, as I said, is a sham in terms of appeal because it's so superficial. I'd like to think that we had the blacks infusing the party, like the Hispanics and the women rising to positions of leadership based on their merit. Mm-hmm. Merit's the most important thing. And of course, people of wisdom, of which most of the National Committee members are. I mean, they do have this wisdom. They saw through it.
I see. Now, the National Committee members, each state has, is it two, a committee man and a committee woman?
And also the state chairman of that party, man or woman, but as long as they're holding that office, they are a voting member of the National Committee.
And so there were three then from
yes,
each state?
One man and one woman of the National Committee, man and woman.
I
yes.
see. And you held the committee woman post from Arizona before you had this job.
Right. I was elected in 1972. Then I was reelected by the state convention in Arizona in 1976.
I see. Now, your counterpart in the Democratic Party, would that be Ora DeConcini? Is she the Democratic National?
She's from Arizona, yes.
Committee woman?
Yes, and certainly a friendly acquaintance of mine, a very fine woman.
I imagine. Okay, we'll be right back. Mary, where is the Republican Party today? Where are you going? What do you hope to accomplish?
We're going to win elections in November of this year, 1978. Our strategy of the Republican National Committee and across the nation is to win state legislative elections and governorships across this country. We're very aware that in 1980 we will have a census, and then we'll be reapportioning, and new congressional districts will be designed, and they'll be done by the state legislatures. So take, for example, Arizona. We must control both houses of the legislature and to have a Republican governor, so this party is not gerrymandered out of existence. So that's our top priority this year. Indeed, we expect to increase our numbers in the Congress and in the Senate, and this will give us a good position for 1980 as we look to the White House.
Well, I know you have a couple of rising young stars, like, for instance, Jim Thompson, who is the Republican young man governor of Illinois. How do people like that fit in with the party? Do you have a couple of more of those coming up that we don't know about?
I think we have a lot of bright stars. I think Jim Thompson certainly is a very imposing, bright, very successful governor, and there's no question in my mind he will be reelected in November. There certainly are others. There's Pete DuPont, the governor of Delaware. There's Congressman Jack Kemp from the state of New York, who's heading up the Roth-Kemp Tax Revolt part for the Republican Party. He is an outstanding young man. Of course, we've got Bob Danforth from Missouri. I think what we're looking at, I think we've got women too that certainly we must look to. I think so often in politics we don't consider the qualified women, and I say qualified men also. And so I see a great number of people. Again, it goes back to identity by the voter, and I see our primary situation starting in 1980 in New Hampshire by looking at that person, that candidate that can really catch fire in the primaries. Because I look back to President Carter, and when he started in the primaries in New Hampshire, he had, I think, 6% identification with the voters. So I think
Jimmy who?
Jimmy, exactly. So I feel that a lot of our younger, brighter stars that are coming along don't have the identification and the visibility, but I do feel that there's every possibility that they certainly will, and I think this election is crucial and critical to us in 1978. But out of that, I think we'll see some crystallization of who really are going to be the candidates who run for the delegates in the convention and the primary.
How do the Republicans elect their delegates to the presidential convention?
Well, it varies in the 50 states based on the statutes of the election law statutes of the state. In Arizona, we elect delegates in a very democratic representative process from the grassroots, the precinct, through the county, through the state, to the state convention, and then that convention, of course, elects its delegates to the national convention, as well as that convention elects the national committee man and committee woman, who are not necessarily delegates, but always have a position on the floor, but they can be delegates.
You spoke earlier about bringing Hispanic women, Hispanics and blacks and women, so on, into the party. What are you doing concretely? What are you doing? What is the Republican strategy to accomplish this?
Well, I think that my office has done a very fine job in terms of a women's program of action for women, which culminated in a national women's conference, which we held this spring in Portland, Oregon, and in Boston, Massachusetts, where we had over 400 people. It was a manifestation of our recognition that today women do need assistance, and as a public service, we offered a series of workshops, not only in political skills, but in helping women to understand credit and taxes, Social Security, retirement plans, job options, and we got into communicating skills, assertiveness training, building self-confidence, and it was highly successful. It was nonpartisan in terms of the participants, and it was nonpartisan in terms of recruitment of the individuals who headed up the workshops, and it was dynamic, and I think it really showed that our party has some real sensitive awareness as to the problems that women do face today.
All right. Okay, let's pause for a commercial, and I want to ask you what you're doing to bring more blacks and Hispanic people into the party. Mary, what type of outreach are you having to the blacks and the Hispanics in America?
Well, we have the Black Auxiliary to our party at the National Black Republican Council. We also have the Republican Hispanic Assembly. In both of these auxiliaries to the party, they are identifying candidates. They are actually reaching out into the black community. We've already had success with a congressman in Louisiana who did win with 30% of the black vote. We are putting, as I said, Hispanic candidates. We've got some congressional candidates. We've got some Hispanics running at the state level. And I think the important thing here in terms of outreach is when you have a candidate that's Hispanic, it draws the Hispanic community, whether it's Democrat or Republican, that the Hispanic voter identifies with that person, and they will indeed register and vote. And of course, that's all part of the auxiliary operation, is to tune in and to do the necessary things to get that particular candidate elected.
The Democratic Party has always been called or known as the party of the minorities. Now, what arguments or persuasions are you using to tell black people and Hispanic people?
Well, I just like to quote Jesse Jackson, who spoke to the National Committee meeting in January, and he said, "We're here vying for both parties. The Democrats have taken us for granted, and the Republicans have written us off." But he says, "I look out at this group today, I really see a genuine interest in the Republican Party, in our concerns." And so from that, we have helped Jesse Jackson in terms of trying to get support in the private sector. So indeed, he can go on with his program for youth in self-reliance and moving ahead. So there are many exciting things in this area. We support and fund the American Black Forum on the Sunday program. We have a black legislative agenda, which is being put together by the Republican leadership in the House of Representatives. So there are many positive things that can't help but build bridges and bring friends, black friends, into our party.
Mary, this taxpayers' revolt, Proposition 13 in California, the wave that's sweeping the country, how does that fit in with Republican politics and Republican thought?
Well, number one, people say the tax revolt started several weeks ago in California. I happen to think that the tax revolt started several years ago when Congressman Jack Kemp of New York actually began the study and research on the Tax Reduction Act. And then it was Jack Kemp and Senator Roth of Delaware who introduced this legislation into the Congress last summer in July. And the proposal actually will help all Americans by reducing the federal income tax rate 30% or 1/3 across the board for all Americans, which will really stimulate the economy and restore incentive, and it's non-inflationary, which is really going to be far more beneficial. So all I'm pointing out is that the Republicans have been in the vanguard of this revolt, and we're going to run with it all the way through the elections in November. But again, I do see that political leaders today have got to recognize that they have to be responsible to you and I, the public, because we are tired of being overtaxed. We are tired of overregulation, excessive government spending. We want to know where our money is going. We don't want to work until May just to pay taxes.
I see. Thank you very much, Mary Chrisp, co-chair of the Republican National Party. It's been a pleasure having you on Talk It Over. Please be with me next week. My guest will be Phyllis Schlafly, who is the leader of the anti-ERA movement.
You've been watching Talk It Over with your host, Ellen Adelstein. Join us every week at this same time for Talk It Over here on Channel 11. The preceding program was pre-recorded.